Okay, good afternoon everybody. I hope you're having an excellent MIPIM. My name's Luke Cross, I'm editor of Social Housing magazine. Yes, that's social housing, which isn't necessarily a common parlance around these parts, but we are in extraordinary times, I think it has to be said. We're at a pivotal moment for UK housing as a whole. This session is set around how the UK government can meet its target of 1 million homes by the end of this Parliament. But it's also largely about the role that all of you will play in that. I think last month's Housing White Paper offered the beginnings of a blueprint to address housing need across the country, and also made one important admission, which was that the UK housing market is broken and needs fixing. Part of the message was that it's everyone's job to address that. Government, developers, investors, local government, and importantly for my sector, housing associations as well, who I'd say are possibly the ones that can make the most immediate impact. But what those delivering housing need now is for government to offer the best possible policy frameworks, from land and planning to the certainty over the policy on social housing rents. So on to the session. In the spirit of MIPIM, we have quite a movable feast of a session for you. Firstly, we're delighted to have Sir Ed Lister here, Chair of the Homes and Communities Agency, soon to be Homes England, and London's former Deputy Mayor. Ed's going to speak for 5 to 6 minutes and then take a few questions, I think. He'll then have to dash off, but we're extremely happy also to have the HCA's new Chief Executive, Nick Walkley, to join us as well. Before that, we'll also hear from Eamon Boylan, Chief Executive of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And then during Q&A, we'll hear from Stephen Haigh, Chief Executive of Live Verdi, our sponsor today, who also heads up a new JV launched by Your Housing Group, which has huge ambitions, I believe, for the off-site manufacturing market in the UK. So, without further ado, Sir Ed.
Thanks very much, and thank you for giving me an opportunity of coming along this afternoon. And of course, the thing that the HCA has done, which I think is of most relevance to Manchester, is of course we've employed a Mancunian as our chief executive, Nick Walkley, who you're going to hear from later. So we are certainly recognising the importance of Manchester by importing our staff from your city. So, you know, don't ever let you say that the HCA is anything but focused nationally and certainly focused in the north. So anyway, a little bit about us. What are we doing? What's the journey we're on? And the first few things I will talk about is the journey. We did a review of the HCA about a year ago, and we've been implementing that review. And the most important part about that review is we are separating ourselves from our regulatory functions. Our regulatory functions are going to go off to another body, don't know what it's going to be called. We are going to be all about land and money and development and homes, and we're going to call ourselves Homes England, but we're going to launch that in a few months' time as we sort of sort ourselves out with the split, because some of this involves some legislation which has to be put through. That review will therefore enable us to focus on what we think is the most important thing, which is actually the delivery of homes. We're secondly, as part of this, have also reorganised ourselves. And we have reduced our staffing numbers a bit. We've also changed the mix of our staffing to recognise where we're going. With investment, and we've got nearly £28 billion of government money now flowing through the Homes and Communities Agency. So we're a big spender. And therefore we needed to have the right kind of financial expertise. And so HCAI was formed, and within the investment side, we've got lots of both land professionals, but bankers, finance people, people who know what they're doing when they're looking at investment. We've also reorganised ourselves with new general managers in each of our areas, and we have an area office, as you know, in Manchester, a pretty important office. And in that office, they look after our land. Will be looking after in due course some of our accelerated commissioning programme, which I'm going to be talking about, and some of our other activities, which again I will pick up in a minute. So we are very much in Manchester and around Manchester. And for us, the Northwest is a pretty important area. So our role, it's firstly accelerating delivery, and that'll be by different methods, and some of those will be fiscal. It'll be about providing more opportunities for people to own their own home. Remember, about a third of our money actually flows into Help to Buy, which is a massive part of our funding arrangements. And that's a significant part of the delivery programme for a lot of house builders. It's about diversifying the market, because we've got to get new entrants into this. It's about doing new construction methods. And of course, it's also about us supporting Manchester's aspirations as a devolved authority and working with them and doing everything together. Because we do see Manchester as a partner, not as the opposition or anything else. They are very much, we are not going to do stuff in Manchester without Manchester being agreeable to it. But let's do a word firstly about the white paper, just for 2 minutes. And the most important part about the white paper is it has tried to emulate in many ways what I think Manchester has done. It started to insist upon having clear planning. Planning is both planning in its traditional sense, but it's also about having a vision for the city, a vision of where it's going, knowing what you actually want, knowing what you're going to deliver, knowing what you're prepared to put into it. And that, of course, is what Manchester has done so successfully. It's about pace of development, which, as we all know, is far, far too slow. And we are just not building the homes we need. Last year was a great year, 170,000 units. It was actually 190,000 in total, but new units was 170,000. Great. Absolutely wonderful. It's nowhere near where we need to be. We need to be about 230, 250. And until we get to those kind of numbers, we are not going to start dealing with the affordability issue, which is affecting absolutely everybody. We have got to get production up. And there is no section of the market which is oversupplied. We need everything. And for all types and tenures, we need the lot. And that's pretty important. And you know, we've also got, and this is where I think the HTA could do a lot, you've got to remember that Britain's top 10 house builders build about 60% of the private homes in this country, of our country. You know, we can't live with that. That is not going to solve the problem. We have got to get more people into it. And if I just jump back to local planning, just bear in mind that 40% of local authorities have no plan. And of the remaining 60%, many of them have a pretty flaky one. So, you know, we really do need to move forward. We need to move forward and do things in a different way. So the first thing is that we have got out of the government the Housing Infrastructure Fund. This is a £2.3 billion fund which is going to be around for infrastructure, and that's pretty important. But like all of our funds, they're either recyclable or recoverable in some way. The days of grant are disappearing very, very quickly. So for us, it is about off-balance sheet deals. And provided we do off-balance sheet deals, then we can move forward. We worked on 1.4 billion for grant funding. And we've got, you know, the most important thing of all, £2 billion for our accelerated commissioning. The Housing Infrastructure Fund, which I touched upon earlier, is going to be pretty important for those parts of the country which need infrastructure to make the sites work. You all know what the situation is, particularly in inner cities. We've got loads of brownfield land, but usually that brownfield land is inaccessible. It's either contaminated in diverse ownerships, it's got a lack of transport, there are all sorts of issues around it, and that's where some of our resources can be used to move it forward. The Accelerated Commissioning Fund, which I mentioned of 2 billion, is perhaps our most exciting programme, or I think it's our most exciting programme. This is about us deliberately going into the market. I mentioned earlier that the top 10 house builders dominate the market, and that's fine. I don't want them to stop building. None of us do. We want to sweat them a bit more to build more. We want to sweat the RSLs and the housing associations to do more. But we've got to do something on top of that, because that's just going to keep us where we are. And accelerated commissioning and construction is one of the ways we think we can do this. Firstly, with accelerated construction, we are going to very basically use land that we've acquired, or local authority land, and we're going to put it into the market. And we're crudely looking for three numbers. We firstly are going to say that site can deliver whatever it can deliver. Let's call it 200 homes for the sake of an argument. Let's no, call it 250. It's my maths, it's easier for me. And the normal house builder absorption rates will be 50 a year, 5 years supply, and then that site will be built out in my simplistic model. No, that's not what we want. We want 250 homes straight away, in one go. And therefore, we're going to say to you, what are you going to give us for the land? Maybe deferred payments, maybe whatever. What are you going to give us in overage? Because if there's a profit in this, we want our share. No different to anybody else in this room. And then there's the clever bit. What do you want back from us to underwrite the whole scheme? And we'll take the stock off you if you can't sell it. So give us a number. And at that point, we have given the developer, the builder, certainty of delivery. And that's the model we're looking at developing further. And we've already done our first couple of these. They've been relatively small scale. We'll build up and we'll increase. But that's a big area for us. How do we get, and that'll be, those houses built through. So it's about a new method of delivery. Then the next point is small builders. And we've got a fund for them as well. And we all know that small builders face three problems: availability of sites, the planning process, because let's not kid ourselves, the planning process is a system that is geared towards the big builder. It's not something for a small builder. And of course, the availability of finance. And this is where we've got to come in. We need those small builders to move forward. We need those small builders to go from SMEs to MEs. And don't forget, if you look at any of the big builders, the top 10, all of those were SMEs once upon a time. It's just that since 2008, we haven't really had any new ones coming through the system. We've got to help them develop forward. So for us, it's about how can we support and help them. That'll be about us perhaps getting involved with the land. It'll be about us perhaps getting involved with the finance. Every site will be different, but we are very much going to get in there and try and help them bring their schemes to fruition. And the Home Builders Fund, which is out there at the moment, has got a lot of expressions of interest from SMEs, and we're encouraging that to come forward. In fact, in many ways, we're getting snowed under with SMEs applying. We've got to work out some better ways of handling it, but it's good news because they're coming forward with schemes. And of course, in the white paper, you've already seen there is this requirement, or will be this requirement in local plans for about 10% of the sites to be small sites. That's pretty important because we do want, and local authorities have got to play their part in finding those small sites and bringing those small sites forward and to get them built out. And, SMEs are going to have to be helped. Then there is modular construction. And that's the other piece that we're very much getting involved with. I said to you earlier, it's about expanding the market. Modular construction is one of the ways that can be done. It's where new disruptors can enter the market, new ways of doing things. You've already got some pretty good examples in Manchester. I think of Urban Splashes schemes, things like that, which are a different way of doing things. We need more of that. We need those factories. We need those factories to be developed across the country. This should be an area of expertise for this country. It's not an area at the moment. I put it to you, if you went round the world, would you ask a British company to sell their expertise in housing to you? The answer is no, because quite frankly, we are delivering such a small amount, but we can change that. And doing things differently is one of the ways we can jump a step, and we've got to do that. 1 million people are going to leave our industry in the next 10 years. They aren't going to be replaced that easily. And Brexit just makes it worse. So we've got to find other ways of doing it. How do we keep people in the industry longer? Factories is one of the ways of doing it. But it's also a chance to train people in a different way, to improve quality, to just do things differently. And we're very much, from the HCA, wanted to get involved with that and wanted to work with people as they develop that and bring that forward. And then the other area, which is, again, somewhere that Manchester has very much led the way on anyway, and is the world of RSL, PRS. We need PRS. It's additionality all the time. It doesn't affect market sale. It doesn't affect the deals with the housing associations. It's pure additionality every time. And there are funds available for that. We've got funds, but the private sector has plenty of funds available. So we're very keen on pushing PRS further. And you've got great examples, but we believe that this can be taken a lot further. So in summary, it's about accelerated construction, it's about modular building, it's about helping SMEs, it's about putting money into viability of sites to bring those sites forward and make development happen. And so these are the ingredients that we're very much pushing. So, and I suppose the last point is that we want to work with those people who want to work with us. This has got to be a journey of the willing. Do we actually all want to see housing? You do in Manchester. That's been shown time and time again. So therefore, we want to work with you. But those parts of the country that don't want to do it, don't want to work with us, then fine. We're certainly not going to waste our time and effort. What the local residents are going to think of that is another matter. But we've got to work with those who want to deliver. And you guys do deliver. And so therefore, we want to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. As I say, Red's got to dash off shortly, but has anyone got any questions at this point at all for Red?
And if they're hard ones, Nick will answer.
You can keep those stored up then. One at the back.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the answers to quality actually is modern methods of construction. Quite frankly, factory-produced units should be able to guarantee you the quality that is needed. I mean, in its simplest form, you actually know in a factory where a piece of wire is going to run. It'll run from A to B because it's on a drawing and it's been made that way. You go on a site and it could be absolutely anywhere. It'll run wherever the electrician or whoever ran the cable at that, because it might not be an electrician, has run that bit of cable at that particular point in time. Silly example. But you do get continuity of delivery within a factory environment. You can also make sure that they are environmentally sound. You can use different materials. So therefore, I believe quality goes hand in hand with speed in that particular case. And that's another reason we're quite supportive of it.
Do you agree?
Well, I think firstly the building regs, the new building regs, have got much better space standards in them than used to be the case. I think they have moved significantly, and I think that must be good. I think that I think it's also about, we've got to recognise what people actually want in city centres. They do want apartments. In the outer city areas, it's about houses. And I think we've got to build what people actually want. I think, again, back to modern methods, you can do that because it's a much cheaper production process that you're operating. And so I think we can move in that direction. I think the regs do help us. I mean, that's a step in the right direction, but I agree with you. I think our homes are often far too small, but I think it's a series of small steps.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Robert Grundy from Sound. Just thinking about off-site, is there a risk that, that in reality we will find off-site manufacture moving out to places like China rather than the UK, and hence not having the multiplier effect on the UK economy that we traditionally think house building has?
I think that's a very fair point. And I think that's something we've got to be careful about. We want those factories here. This is a great opportunity for employment. I would suggest to you that the supply chain pretty much makes it that you need to have it locally to hand. You've got to be able to move it fairly quickly. I think we're at an interesting point in the development of this industry. Either we embrace this ourselves as a country, we put resources into it, and those resources could come from us, it could come from other people, and we really take it and we become worldwide experts at it, or quite frankly, we just continue to import bits and pieces from elsewhere in the world, which I don't think is the right thing to do. I think there's the potential here for many thousands of jobs. There's the potential here for us to become world leaders. Because don't kid yourself, outside the UK, I mean, a lot of European countries are doing far better than us, but they're not doing that much. I mean, there's a great opportunity here. And I would have thought it's very attractive. Certainly, from an HCA point of view, I very much want us to see it as part of our scoring mechanism on land. What are you actually putting on the table in the way of factories? What are you putting on the table in the way of jobs? I mean, that's as interesting to us as the number of homes that are being produced. So I think that's where we are. We'll do everything we can to encourage it, but excuse me saying so, you guys have got to come to the table as well.
Okay. I think we're going to talk more on off-site just in a few moments, but I think we're going to hear from Eamon as well to give the Manchester perspective now.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much, Sir Ed. A few things just to say from a Manchester perspective. I mean, it goes without saying that we are absolutely up for accelerating housing growth. I would not be promoting the production of small effigies of myself for people to stick pins in greenbelt areas in Greater Manchester, where we're not committed to such an approach. But I think we need to be very, very clear about what it is that will work in the environment that we are working in. We can identify land, but in order to get the kind of benefits that was being talked about there in terms of off-site production, we need to get a pipeline of deliverable sites out there that people can actually start to look at and give themselves confidence that in building a factory, if that's what they wish to do, there's demand out there and there's a supply that they can provide. Now, we can only do that on two bases, in my view. One is if we, and I think the autumn statement and the white paper are encouraging in this regard, but we need to go further. Can we actually start to think about a place-based investment strategy that is about how we actually bring land forward and how we then see that land developed, rather than, I think there is a danger of this, looking at a series of investment silos that are about financial instruments for remediation and financial instruments for delivery. And I think what we're looking for and what we are seeking from a GM perspective in discussion with HCA and with government is a greater degree of flexibility around funding to enable us actually to take that place-based approach. Because the other issue for me in terms of quality, size matters, design standards matter, the quality of place matters. And this is not only about a house building agenda in Greater Manchester, it's about a place making agenda. It's about creating environments that people actually want to live in, and it's about creating markets where none have previously existed, because many of you know that a lot of the areas that we're seeking to prioritise in inner city Manchester or elsewhere are areas where values are weak and where the viability threshold is a really high hurdle. So I think we need to look to examples such as that being pursued by Manchester Life in Ancoats, where yes, of course, it's about a volume home building project, but it's fundamentally also about a place shaping and place making agenda that's fundamental to the quality of that locality. So I think we need a supply of land, and we are determined that we will identify that supply. We need access to funding in a way that enables that land to be brought forward, because I don't want to go through the pain of producing a spatial framework and then get hung out to dry because I don't have a 5-year viable and deliverable supply of land. And that's something that I think we simply cannot afford to do. Last thing on quality, I do think it's interesting that the one area in the policy framework in the GMSF that has attracted any degree of interest, of course, greenfield sites have attracted a lot of interest, but the only policy area that's attracted any interest is our timid suggestion that we might want to promote better design standards. And a number of people have pushed back and saying, do you not realise how bloody hard it is to build houses anyway? And our response is, it is bloody hard for places to be sustainable unless we address that design challenge up front. And I think I'll be looking to try and make sure that GM has a proper debate about the kind of design standards that the city have been promoting to actually try and push that debate forward. Last thing I would say, as I think we need to be clear about typologies. And one of the things that, if I could disagree with Ed on, the agenda for me is not simply about apartments in city centres and houses in the suburbs. It is about the appropriate mix of housing, the appropriate mix of residential uses in places that can sustain those places and that can meet the real demand that exists out there. So I come back to my continuing mantra. We have to make certain that what we can do is deliver on a place basis. And that's about housing, it's about other uses, it's about other services. It's about infrastructure as well. But that's where we really need to get ourselves to in terms of our ability to manage the resource base that's available to us. And we need to be therefore creative in making sure that we're looking at the role of the public sector and the private sector to make certain that we're not trying to remediate land through wholly recoverable financial instruments without the interplay with local authorities that can look to capture value further down the pipe. I won't get onto land value capture, that's just too complicated even for me at this time in the afternoon. But I hope that gives you a sense of where we're coming from. Absolute commitment to growth, but an absolute commitment to sustainable growth on a place basis.
Okay. Ed has become Nick, as you can see. So, Nick, did you want to come back on any of that at all?
It's really great to be here. I need to fess up, I'm not Mancunian born, but I'm hoping I'll be adopted shortly. I guess I just wanted to say three things in response to Eamon. First of all, I welcome that conversation. I'm too tired to have multiple conversations in the same place about different funding streams at different points in time. What we need to be doing is to identify what the opportunities are to utilise the national resource in places that want to take that forward. And it seems to me, to respond to the quality question, part of the answer to that, and I was in Ancoats on Monday afternoon, drinking coffee and smiling to myself, remembering it from when I was a kid. Part of quality comes from ensuring that alongside the public sector, there are other long-term interests for whom the place will matter into the future if they're going to benefit from it. Because no poor quality place, no poor quality design gives that long-term yield, and that we have to align interests, and the HCA is interested in funding mechanisms that allow it to do exactly that. I think on modern methods, I just say this, there's a time for competition and there is a time for collaboration, and Manchester's authorities are an outstanding example of when there's a time for that collaboration, because working against each other or competing won't work. I've been saying this in other forums, so there's a challenge now for housing associations. If we need to guarantee a supply and we need to help underwrite land, our housing associations are prepared to now work together around the supply chain, around modern methods, to help us underwrite that factory that we need somewhere in the northwest and elsewhere in the UK. I would argue now's the time on some issues for the sector to collaborate rather than compete.
Does that go for house builders as well then? Or?
It's day 8, so shortly after I've parted the seas, I'll solve that one if that's okay. But I do think there are too many examples. I'm going around the country at the moment. You know, you can imagine everywhere still smells of paint. Everybody smiles when they see me still. There are too many examples where local authorities are showing real leadership, arguing for place, and then a number of house builders are delivering the same product. And that if they are delivering the same product, we ought to be able to raise the quality of that product through a degree of standardisation and through a degree of thinking about working together on it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we do have Stephen here who can both give the perspective on quality around off-site construction and the housing association perspective, I suppose. So, Stephen, what would you say to the initial question and also to Nick's points?
Yes, thank you, Luke. I think, interestingly, I'm here to bust a few myths about housing associations. here to disrupt and here to answer Robert Grundy's question on Chinese supplying all materials into the UK. So in terms of housing associations, I think there's a sort of an analogy that they don't do a great deal, but they're actually big businesses. There are 1,700 associations across the whole of the UK, and I've looked at where we are in the food chain. We're number 26 out of the 1,700. We own 33,000 properties across the north of England, mainly northwest, from Cumbria down to Staffs Moorlands. Ultimately, for that 33,000 properties that we own and manage, our turnover is 195 million. And last year we made a profit of 45 million. So making a profit of 45 million, there's a lot of dubious noises around the sector that it's a not-for-profit. That's not the case. We are not for distributable profit. So we are definitely for making a profit as organisations, and obviously by making a profit, we then reinvest that profit into building more homes for more people. So that leads me into the rest of the sector. I mean, obviously we've had a challenge as a housing association to be able to scale up and be able to use that balance sheet capacity that we've currently got to be able to do more. So if we look at our own circumstance, and I'll put that into a wider context, our own circumstance is that we have a 1.2 billion balance sheet value of those 33,000 properties, which is held at cost. We currently have a debt of 500 million on that total balance sheet value, which represents about 40% gearing capacity. Now, if I look at, we're number 26, and I look at the 25 above us and add all of that together, that gives 70 billion of actual balance sheet value that all of those top 26 have. And if you look at their gearing capacity, they've currently got 27.5 billion of debt against that 70 billion. So again, relatively low geared. If you were to take that into a similar place which we're doing, which is we're gearing up to 75% from 40%, that brings in another 18 billion of capacity just in the top 26. And don't forget there's 1,700 associations. So when I look at how I'm going to solve this million home challenge, of course we need land, we need faster planning systems, we need help in terms of infrastructure loans, which all the white paper has set out is really helpful, and it will move things forward for us. So what your housing group has done, and what I've done in terms of looking at how we can scale up is, you know, my background before your housing group, I was a volume house builder, so I was guilty of building 50 or 60 a year. You know, maximising profits, holding back sales, so we could achieve that. Volume house builders have tied up land all over the country on many options, secured them so that these are undevelopable. So what we need is now a refreshing change in terms of opportunities of sites. And what your housing group wants to do is to continue building a complete mixed tenure solution. But within that, of course, we need to be building many more affordable homes. The only way that we can build affordable homes, because of course grant has now almost gone. The rent reduction that we had in 2015 of -1% took 65 million of income straight out of our five-year income projections. So what we need to do is look at something which is going to allow us to reduce build costs, which is Robert's question around modular off-site construction. So I've been looking at alternatives for off-site construction. I've had meetings with L&G, but ultimately where we've ended up, and we signed the deal in December with our joint venture partners, WeLink. And WeLink are a global solar energy provider who bring to the table their Chinese connection. But the Chinese are looking to build factories in the UK. The Chinese are looking to create a great funding solution. And of course, that means it's local labour, local materials, and obviously nothing is coming in from China. And we're working with British Steel. The solution here is to work with local labour, local supply chain. So what that means for us as Your Housing Group, if you take going back to the 65% gearing up that we need to do, that for us means another 300 million of capacity that we can purely bring into Your Housing Group as equity. So that equity then we need to leverage up. What China bring to the table is all the construction debt. So by bringing all of the construction debt in, essentially what we're doing is buying land, making it ready to be built, and then of course China are coming in with the modular solution and all of the debt. So for that 300 million, rather than typically housing associations would use all of that capacity to just build homes, by leveraging up, it means we can build 16, 17,000. Now, if you take that, and I did a quick sum on the 18 billion of capacity, if you were to do that, then there's 900,000 homes. So there we go. We've sold the million home challenge.
That's sorted out.
Sorted out.
And all roads lead to China, as per usual. Have we got any more questions at all from the floor? No. Okay. I mean, one thing that I suppose from a housing association perspective in particular that they would say, Stephen, and to bring you in as well, Nick, is, I mean, obviously the headroom that they have, they would say, well, firstly, that they need, as charities and not-for-profits, they do actually need to be relatively cautious in the way that they go into the housing market. And I suppose that is clearly a message from the regulatory side of the HCA as well. And the other thing is the existing sort of financial arrangements which do constrain them. Is there any sort of comeback on either of those points, Nick?
Whilst I'd acknowledge that those concerns are out there, I would just push back. We've just heard a fantastically eloquent example of how a creative housing association can use its own resources and its own capacity to deliver on those things, and the HCA is really interested in how it can then use its resources and its capacity to de-risk some of those things so we can actually support in doing that. The second thing I'd say is that it's easy to find lots of arguments for not moving forward in the current difficult climate, but that's to fail in some of the founding aims of many housing associations, which is to deliver more homes and more affordable homes, and that a kind of rediscovery of some of those routes seems really, really important.
Yeah. Stephen?
No, I think that's right. I mean, ultimately the solution, and you talk about housing associations, very risk averse, obviously very, very conscious of the regulator. So every conversation I have with my board around the regulator just puts them into a dark place, and actually stymies development going forward. But ultimately, what we want to do is build more affordable housing. And as I say, without grant, with the rent reduction, it means we just cannot do it and make a profit. So we need to find a solution and an alternative. Our board were brave, and they decided that this was the way to deal with it.
Okay, we have a question here.
Stephen, I was really interested in your sort of maths and sort of level of gearing. The REIT sector is what's been driving their balance sheets is reducing gearing to around a 25% level. Very different model.
Yeah.
Just I wondered, what do you think is the natural long-term gearing that a housing association
really good
RP should work to? Not wishing to challenge your numbers, but it's something that just concerned me with your eloquent.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously, we're about building homes. We're about creating a solution to build more homes, to solve the supply. And obviously gearing up, I think, relatively to 65% is not pushing it that far. So we've still got headroom capacity within that. So for me, we want to get to a point where we can then use our 300 million as a revolving facility within the arrangements that we've got with our funding partners. We're brave, and I think other housing associations need to follow our lead and build more housing.
Okay. Eamon, do you want to come in at all?
I really admire what Stephen's done, and I think the potential that creates for us to up our game in terms of delivery is really very, very substantial. I would slightly flippantly say, if the answer to the question is a gearing ratio of 62.75%, then we're probably asking the wrong question. And really, for me, it's about what do we need to do to give people the confidence to be able to commit. And some of the regulatory fear that Stephen referred to, I've heard other RPs say the same thing. And that is, as soon as I put a shared ownership sign up outside a site, I'm immediately excluding 92% of the population who don't qualify for that particular form of public subsidy. QED, that's a big risk. If I can just build and effectively then fit the tenure to people as they turn up, a little bit like going into a car showroom. You know what you want, you know what the spec is, you know what colour you want, you know which fancy alloys you want on it. The last thing you ask is, well, how am I going to pay for this? And that's really, I think, a model that we need to think about in terms of delivering housing, because actually, we all of us don't want to build mono-tenure. We all want to build mix. We all want to build sustainability. We want to build affordability in mixed neighbourhoods. And yet we traditionally have had approaches that almost preclude us from doing that, or make it very, very difficult to do that. And I think there's an opportunity for us, working with a light regulatory touch, working with creative financial approaches to just increase our capacity, to actually take a different approach and start to deliver some real progress on the ground.
Okay. And I mean, how are those relationships for you with RPs currently? I mean, are they
fantastic.
Fantastic, excellent.
No, we are working very, very hard with RPs across Greater Manchester, a substantial number of whom share the vision that we have and are willing to work together. And we've contemplated bringing together a number of them into to create a single development company to share risk and to pool risk, to actually enable them to take initiatives such as those that Stephen has alluded to. Collaboration across the RP sector in GM, I think, is in a good place. Some of us would have heard Marty Edelman, though, I think either last night or this morning, saying that as a developer, he's genetically defective in that he lacks the collaboration gene. And he described that as an interesting trait for the development industry as a whole. Whether we can actually do the genetic engineering needed to actually refit people to collaborate, I don't know. But we are seeing examples, both across public and private sector, of genuine collaboration where where people are actually signed up to and have confidence in and commitment to a vision of a place. And if you want to see that, go to New Islington and see what's being done there, where there is very substantial private investment going in through the Abu Dhabi United Group and other partners into creating what will be a fantastic place, which is built around a vision of diversity, built around a vision of an urban dynamic, and it will be great. And it's that vision that I think is unifying people as much as anything else.
Okay, a question here.
Hello. Nick Johnston, Inside Housing. Question for Nick Walkley. When you were at Haringey, you signed off or came very close to signing off a £2 billion regeneration project, which is now going to Lend-Lease by the sounds of things. What I'd be interested in the midst of the sort of controversy around that particular scheme, would you be interested in your HCA role in sort of bringing about similar kinds of regeneration projects? And if so, sort of what would they look like, and what approach would you have? What approach would you take to speeding up delivery?
Thanks for that. I guess a response to that is, first of all, I just flatly reject the going to phrase. What is interesting about the Haringey procurement is the local authority using its assets to create a joint venture company which it controls 50% of, primarily so that it's able to realise the value uplift in land and to have a hand in that long-term stake in shaping a place, particularly where there is inherent value. And I guess from an HCA perspective, we are really, really interested in supporting joint ventures in many forms, where places and organisations are looking to capture value, and particularly value uplift in land as part of reshaping places and economies. But to try and pretend there's a single template for every place in the country is palpable nonsense. And in fact, even within places, there are micro-housing markets, there are different situations. And I think the HCA's job is to identify those places with a strong narrative, with good leadership, that are prepared to participate in joint ventures and ventures that will allow them to shape place going forward. And to do that, I think my job is on an opener basis as possible, so that, you know, I don't go into Eamon's office and I have another conversation about X funding stream rather than Y funding stream, because that's not helpful for a place trying to move issues forward.
Okay.
Is that enough copy for next week?
Wonderful. Okay. We started late, so we finished a little bit late. But thanks everyone for your interest and for coming to this session. Thank you to our panel. We hope you found it useful and interesting, and it gives you something to think about for the UK housing market. Please enjoy a drink, and thanks again.